All right, get ready, because we are diving deep today. And folks, this topic, it might just turn everything you thought you knew about getting sick, well, upside down. We're going to be unpacking this thing called Nueva Medicina, and get this, what if disease, all disease, isn't some like error, some mistake, but actually our body's trying to protect us.
It's a pretty radical idea, right? And it's right at the heart of this book by Dr. Fernando Callejón. It's called La Lupa de la Nueva Medicina.
La Lupa.
Yeah, it translates to like the magnifying glass of Nueva Medicina.
Okay, I'm so there. So who is this Callejón? What's his deal?
Well, he's a doctor, obviously, but he's also really into psychoanalysis and, get this, anthropological philosophy.
Whoa. Okay.
Yeah, right. So in this book, he's taking the 5 laws of the Nueva Medicina, which were actually first developed by Dr. Ryke Geerd Hamer. And he's using this like blend of all these different perspectives to explain this completely different way of thinking about, well, everything.
Yeah.
Health, disease, the whole shebang.
I'm picking up what you're putting down. It's like our bodies are speaking a language we've totally forgotten, and Callejón is like our translator, right?
100%. He's giving us the cheat sheet.
I am ready to decode, so hit me with it. What's that first law all about?
All right, so the first law is called the iron law of cancer, and everything else.
Hold up.
And everything else.
You caught that, huh? Yeah, it's not just about cancer, even though the name might make you think that. It actually applies to, well, everything.
Okay, so Hamer, he was focused on cancer at first. That's where the name comes from.
Bingo. But as he dug deeper, he realized this law, it was bigger. It applied to all diseases. All right, so what does this iron law actually tell us? What's the deal?
It says that every single disease, and I mean everything, from a little sniffle to, something way more serious, it all starts with what's called a biological conflict.
Biological conflict. See, now, when I hear that, I'm thinking, like, wrestling a bear, What are we really talking about here?
Not quite a bear fight, no. We're talking about a different kind of conflict here.
Yeah.
Imagine this. You find out your best friend, your ride or die, has been skimming money from your company.
Ouch. Yeah.
That's a huge shock, right? That sudden betrayal, that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Callejón uses another great example in the book. He talks about this woman who was promised an inheritance by her uncle. She's already picked out a spot for this, like, antique chest in her house. Mm-hmm. And then, boom, she finds out it's all going to some distant relative she's never even met.
Brutal.
And for her, it wasn't even really about the money. It was about, like, the sting of that betrayal, that sudden rug being pulled out from under her. That's the conflict.
Okay, so it's not like the actual event. It's more about the emotional experience, the internal whammy of it all, right?
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. This is where Callejón brings in this idea of like a triad. It's your psyche, your brain, and then the organ that's actually affected.
It's our triad.
Yeah, and these aren't just like separate things. They're all super connected. So you've got this conflict. It hits your psyche, and that triggers a real physical response in the brain. He actually says you can see it on a brain scan.
No.
Yeah. And then that brain response, it leads to a reaction in a specific organ, which can then manifest as disease.
Okay, so let's go back to that inheritance example for a sec. Let's say this woman, she ends up developing a stomach ulcer after she hears this news about her inheritance. Are you saying there's a direct link between her shock, that feeling of betrayal, then something happening in her brain, and boom, the ulcer?
And get this is actually where Dr. Hamer's own story comes into play. You familiar with Dirk Hamer Syndrome? DHS?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Remind me, though.
So, tragically, Hamer's son, Dirk, he passed away. And not long after, both Hamer and his wife, they were diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, wow.
And it really got him thinking, could there be this connection? Could these super intense emotional experiences actually be triggering these illnesses?
And that question, that was the start of all of this.
Absolutely, it changed everything. And he started seeing these same kinds of patterns with his patients. Many of them had gone through something really heavy emotionally right before they got sick. And Hamer, he wasn't just like, guessing here. He analyzed thousands of cases, really dug into the research, documented everything super carefully. And that's how he laid the foundation for this whole system, the Nueva Medicina.
Talk about dedication. You said before that the organ's response, it's not random, right? What did he find there?
Okay, so he found that there are 4 main ways that organs respond to these conflicts. There's cell proliferation, then cell necrosis, we also have ulcers, and then finally functional changes.
Okay, break those down for me. What's going on in each of those?
So cell proliferation, That's basically when you get a super rapid increase in cells, like when a tumor grows, for example. Then you've got cell necrosis, which is like the opposite. That's when cells start dying off, which is what happens with an ulcer. Ulcers, functional changes, that's when an organ, it doesn't work the way it should. Maybe it's underperforming, maybe it's overperforming, you know.
So it's not always about like something growing or shrinking, but about how the organ actually does its job.
Exactly. And this is something Callejón really drives home. Each of these responses, it's not random. It's not a mistake.
Yeah.
It serves a biological purpose. Your body's always trying to survive, right? So these responses, they're like ancient survival mechanisms.
That is so wild. Our bodies are way more complex and way more intelligent than we realize.
Right. I mean, it really makes you think. And that's just the first law?
Okay, so we've got these biological conflicts happening. They're triggering these responses. But it's not just like a one and done kind of thing, right? There's more to it.
You're right. It's a whole process. It's like this dynamic back and forth. And that's what the second law of the Nueva Medicina is all about. It's called the rhythmic dance of conflict and resolution.
Rhythmic dance. All right, you're going to have to teach me the steps to this one. Break it down.
I think of it like, imagine a pendulum, right? It's constantly swinging from one side to the other. So with this, we're talking about two main phases. There's the conflict active phase, we call that CA, and then there's the conflict resolution, or CL phase.
Got it. CA, CL, okay.
And that CA phase, that's that initial hit, that fight or flight response that happens when you first experience the conflict.
So, like, in those examples we were talking about before, the second that person realizes their friend is stealing from them or they've been written out of the will, that's when CA kicks in.
Exactly. Your body goes on high alert. Stress hormones, they're through the roof. Your sympathetic nervous system is like, it's go time.
It's like your body's pulling an all-nighter, but like involuntarily.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And a little bit of that stress response, that's totally normal. It's actually helpful in a lot of ways. But here's where the trouble starts. When we can't get out of that CA phase.
It's like that all-nighter never ends.
Exactly. Your body can't run on fumes forever, right?
Right.
Eventually, it needs to switch to that CL phase, that conflict resolution. That's where things start to calm down. Your parasympathetic nervous system steps in. It's like, all right, everybody, chill, time to rest and recover. And that's when your body can actually start to repair the damage that was done during that crazy CA phase.
Makes sense. Your body's had a chance to process what happened, and now it's like, okay, time to clean up this mess.
Exactly. But, and this is a big but, Callejón says, that transition, it's not always smooth sailing, you know, and if we interrupt that natural CACL cycle, especially if we try to force things like with certain aggressive treatments at the wrong time, it can backfire big time.
So timing is key. Like you wouldn't tell someone in the middle of a panic attack to just calm down, right? That's not going to work.
Perfect example. And there's actually another piece of that CL phase that's really interesting. It's called the epileptoid crisis.
Epileptoid crisis? That sounds kind of intense.
It's not as scary as it sounds. Think of it this way. You know how sometimes when your computer's acting up, the best thing you can do is just, like, reboot the whole thing?
Yeah. Hit that restart button.
Well, the epileptoid crisis is kind of like that for your body.
So it's like a hard reset after everything that's happened.
Exactly. It's like this final push to, like, fully clear the cache. And yeah, it might feel kind of intense in the moment, but it's actually a really good sign.
So even though it might feel kind of crappy, it actually means your body's working to fully heal?
100%. Now, Callejón does say that how intense that CL phase is, including the epileptoid crisis, that can all be impacted by how bad the initial CA phase was and how long it lasted.
So if you're dealing with a conflict that's just been dragging on, or if it was just super intense from the get-go, the healing process, that's going to be tougher.
It's like imagine running a marathon, but you're sprinting the whole time. That recovery, brutal.
Yeah, that's going to take a while to bounce back from. Okay, so the takeaway here is we got to listen to our bodies, work with them, not against them.
Couldn't say better myself. And that leads us perfectly into the third law. And get this, we're going all the way back to the beginning. We're talking the embryonic stage.
Okay, now you're really blowing my mind. What does all of this have to do with, like, being in the womb?
See, that's what's so cool about the Nueva Medicina. It connects all these dots, all these things that seem totally unrelated. Hamer, he called this the ontogenetic system of tumors.
Ontogenetic system of tumors. Catchy.
Right. Maybe decoding the embryonic blueprint is a little less of a mouthful, though.
Way less of a mouthful. So what is this blueprint all about?
So it basically says that how our organs and tissues respond to those conflicts, it's all based on which germ layer they came from, way back when we were just little blobs in the womb.
Germ layers. Okay, give me a little refresher. What were those again?
So basically, really early on, when we're just starting to develop, we're just this little cluster of cells, right?
Mm.
And then we differentiate into these three main layers,
Yeah.
the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm.
Okay, right.
And each of those layers, they go on to form different organs and tissues. Like the endoderm, that forms a bunch of your internal organs, like the lining of your digestive system, your lungs, all that good stuff.
Right, okay, it's all coming back to me now. So how does that play into disease?
Well, the idea is that organs that came from different germ layers, they actually respond differently to those biological conflicts. So, for example, organs that develop from the endoderm and some parts of the mesoderm, they tend to develop tumors during that CA phase.
Okay, and what about the organs that come from the ectoderm and the rest of the mesoderm? What happens to those?
Those guys, they tend to react a bit differently. They might develop ulcers or they might have changes in how they function. It's like these ancient programs, like they're hardwired into us from the very beginning, and they're still influencing how our bodies react to stress and conflict today.
You're blowing my mind right now. It's
Right.
like our bodies have this whole hidden history that we're just starting to uncover. So do we have any, like, real world examples of this? How does it actually play out?
So Callejón, he talks about this thing called circular saw syndrome.
Yeah.
It was observed in Germany. Basically, you had all these pregnant women who were living near these lumber mills,
Okay.
and they were constantly exposed to this super loud noise, those circular saws going all day long.
Oh, yeah, I bet that's loud.
And get this, a lot of their babies, they were born with motor and sensory impairments.
Whoa, really? Just from the noise?
That's the theory. And it's because, think about it, sound travels so differently in the womb, right? So these little developing embryos, they're basically getting bombarded with this super intense noise all the time.
Mm.
And even though it wasn't actually like physically hurting them, their systems, they interpreted it as a threat, like a saber-toothed tiger threat.
Wow, like a primal fear response, even though it's just noise.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Their bodies were like, danger, danger. And that triggered this whole cascade of events that impacted their development.
That is wild. It just shows you how deep these programs run, right? So how does knowing all this about where these organs came from back in the womb, how does that actually help us treat disease today?
It tells us that we can't just have like a one-size-fits-all approach to treatment. Every case is different because everyone's story, every organ's story is different. Like you wouldn't treat a tumor that developed from the endoderm the same way you would treat an ulcer that came from the ectoderm. Right. They're totally different tissues with totally different evolutionary responses.
Yeah.
We have to understand the specific language each organ is speaking and work with the body's wisdom.
This is all just, wow, really makes you think about how much we don't know.
Right. And it gets even wilder.
Okay, you got to tell me, what gets wilder than all of this?
Microbes.
Microbes. Those little guys. I thought those were, like, the bad guys. Like, isn't the goal to get rid of them?
See, that's what's so different about this Nueva Medicina thing. That's the fourth law, actually. The ontogenetic system of microbes, which sounds super jargony, but it's basically saying that microbes, they're not just these random attackers. They actually have a really specific job.
Yeah.
And get this, it's actually helpful.
Hold on. Beneficial.
Yeah.
How are microbes, the things that we're always trying to fight off, how are they helpful?
It goes back to those germ layers. Remember how we were saying that each one kind of has its own way of responding to conflict?
Right.
Well, each microbe, it's got this affinity for the tissues that came from a particular germ layer. But here's the thing. They're only active during that CL phase, when the conflict is resolving.
So you're telling me these microbes, the bacteria, the viruses, all those guys, they're actually there to clean up the mess.
Think of it like this. Imagine a construction site, right? First, you've got to bring in the demolition crew, tear down the old structure before you can build something new, right?
Right.
Microbes, they're like that demolition crew. They break down the damaged cells, the tissues that aren't working anymore, so the healthy new ones can come in and do their thing.
Okay, I never thought of it like that. That's incredible. So our bodies really do have this whole system for keeping things in balance.
It's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
And it totally changes how you think about disease. It's
Yeah.
not this thing to be terrified of. It's just a process. It's like this communication going on between your body and everything you're dealing with.
Yeah. This is honestly blowing my mind, but I gotta be honest, I'm also a little, I don't know, overwhelmed. We've covered so much. How does it all fit together? All these laws, the conflicts, the phases, the layers, now the microbes. Help me out here.
Well, that's where the fifth law comes in.
Yeah.
It's all about language. He calls it the language of needs and the power of metaphor. And this one, it brings everything together. It connects what's going on in your body to like your emotions and, get this, even symbols.
Okay, now that sounds really complicated.
It's not as bad as it sounds. It's actually pretty straightforward. Think about it, humans. We're the only ones who use language, right? We think
Yeah.
in symbols. We tell ourselves stories. We're constantly assigning meaning to everything. And all of that, our thoughts, our feelings, our interpretations, that impacts us physically.
So you're saying that what we're thinking, what we believe, all of that can actually trigger real biological responses in our bodies.
You got it. And Callejón, he's careful to point out that there's a difference between, like, our basic needs, like the need for food or water, and then these psychobiological demands. Those are specific to humans because they're shaped by our experiences, by language.
Okay, I need an example.
So think about food, the need to eat. Every animal needs food to survive, right? But let's say you have a super stressful day and you find yourself craving, I don't know, like a specific meal, maybe something your grandma used to make, something like that. It's not that your body is actually hungry. It's more about what that food represents, Maybe it reminds you of feeling safe and loved.
It's emotional.
Exactly. It's not just a physical need anymore. It's something more. It's psychobiological.
Okay, that's a really good example. So what happens when we've got all these unmet needs, all these conflicts that we haven't dealt with?
They come out somehow.
Yeah.
They can manifest physically as disease. It's like our bodies are trying to tell us something, trying to get our attention.
It's sending us a message.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have to learn how to listen. It's not enough to just treat the symptoms. We have to understand the message behind them, figure out what our bodies are trying to tell us. And that's what's so powerful about this whole approach.
It really is. It's about seeing the whole picture.
Wow. Well, this has been an incredible deep dive. I know I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone listening has too.
Me too.
And remember, folks, this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you're ready to really dig into this, I highly recommend checking out Dr. Callejon's book.
It's a good one. It'll definitely give you a lot to think about, maybe even change how you see your health. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, everyone, keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep listening to your amazing bodies.